We're good to go. Just stand in front of the camera. All right. Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see your wonderful faces today. I'm Daniel Cooperman, the Community Services Director for the City of San Rafael, and we are here for our third and final Homelessness Solutions Working Group. So let's jump right in, shall we? As you guys know, it will be recorded on Zoom and available for public consumption later. All right, so tonight's agenda, here's a little overview of what we're going to be discussing. So we have our main discussion item is the camping ordinance and potential updates. We have Rob Epstein, our city attorney here, who will do a little Q&A and talk for a while. Then we're going to do some small group discussions around the ordinance and how it's affecting residents and businesses here in San Rafael. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with a discussion around communication and engagement between the city, stakeholders, and residents. And then we will wrap up. So here we are, third meeting. By show of hands, who was at the second meeting? Okay, so a nice chunk. Obviously, we got a little sidetracked from our agenda last time, which is why we're pivoting today to really discuss the ordinance. It is clearly a hot topic within San Rafael, and this is your opportunity to give feedback, share your experience, and this input will be given to the City Council as it's discussed in its April 7th meeting. And then also at that council meeting, we'll be discussing our sanctioned campsite and an update on the EROP funds from the state and county and what we're doing with that. And as I mentioned earlier, remarks from our city attorney. Yeah. All right. So in the last couple of weeks, the CAL FIRE released its fire hazard severity zones. We've heard from a lot of folks who are nervous about encampments, how they relate to fires, and how that affects the city of San Rafael. So we did those maps were released last week or 2 weeks ago, excuse me. And so we do have a few of our parks, actually the majority of our parks are in high density fire zones. So we wanted to share that out with the group. Yeah. You want to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to tee this off, the handoff to our city attorney, but this, the fire hazard severity zones have presented some new information in the way we view our camping ordinance. And as Daniel mentioned, that there are a good number of our parks that fall within these zones. And when we look at the parks that currently don't allow camping under our camping ordinance, and the number of parks that fall within this fire severity zone, in response to the conversations that we had at the last meeting, just the general community feedback that we've received, looking at how we make changes to the camping ordinance, this piece of information that CAL FIRE provided 2 weeks ago gives us a new kind of way of looking at what our camping ordinance is here locally. And this map is kind of small, but I will add that parks that fall within the moderate or high zones, so the yellow or the orange, include parks like Sun Valley, Gerstle Park, Boyd Park, Terra Linda up in Terra Linda, as well as Santa Margarita, which is way up kind of towards the top of Terra Linda as well. And so tonight, and Rob will kind of talk through this, is as we look at what are the options for the city in response to, I think, the overwhelming community feedback that we've received to the camping ordinance, kind of boils down into kind of three things. The first of which is that whenever looking at public policy, the first thing that you can do is not do anything. And so we can continue to have the camping ordinance in its current form exist. Or other options as it relates to this map is that we can look to, prohibit camping in areas that CAL FIRE has designated as a fire severity zone. And then you would get to a question around critical mass and the total number of parks that we have, and are a majority of them not allowing camping versus others. And so the third option is to look at prohibiting camping in all of the city parks. These are all just alternatives that we're bringing forward and we'll discuss later in this meeting. But no decisions have been made as to what the city is going to do. But now we have this group, and after hearing everyone at the last meeting, we know that this is definitely the topic du jour. We want to at least present those as options, but there's more context to this, and that's why we've invited our esteemed city attorney Rob Epstein here to kind of provide a little more color and perspective on the camping ordinance, what the city has been doing as it relates to the camping ordinance, and what the path forward looks like with regards to the camping ordinance. I'll hand it off to Rob.
Thanks, Sean.
Yep.
Hold your applause, please. Wait, so let me see how you like my remarks. It's good to see everybody tonight. And is the mic picking me up okay if I stand here? So it's great to see friends like Joanne and Roger, and I'm sure many others of you who, like me, are longtime residents. I know that to be true of the two I just mentioned, and who are aware, like I am, having grown up here, that people being unhoused, living in the kind of circumstances that are on the subject of discussion tonight is not something new in Santa Rafael. It's something that I can remember being the case here since my childhood. It's kind of waxed and waned over the years, and it's certainly a time now that there are a lot of challenges that the community is experiencing, and certainly a lot of community concern around the issue. But I just make that observation at the outset that this is something that we've been facing here for a long time. I've been city attorney now more than 17 years, and it's been under discussion and action that the city's been taking, ever since I started and before then. So what's been new and different over the last couple of years is the new ordinance that we adopted and then got sued over in federal court. And I think those of you who follow the news are familiar that with at least some of that tale that happened. And kind of near the tail end of that lawsuit, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in the Grants Pass case that concerned the constitutionality in relation to one theory, which is cruel and unusual punishment, whether a municipality could, have a camping ban and enforce it. And interestingly, I listened to the argument and then I read the argument because our case was then pending. The city was expressly mentioned at the beginning of the argument and the end of the argument there at 1 First Street in Washington, D.C. And then Justice Sotomayor, I'm certain of this, when she referenced some of the decisions that were being made in cases, was sort of obliquely referencing her colleague in the Northern District of San Francisco, our Judge Chen, who was the one who had, made a ruling, an injunction ruling against us that required that, we revisit our ordinance and make changes. So I'm not going to get into all the detail of the lawsuit that we went through, but that was something big that we experienced over the last couple of years, required a lot of lawyer time, a lot of appearances of court, a lot of staff time, star witnesses like Lynn Murphy, who appeared in court to testify on behalf of the city. And prior to that, in connection with the sanctioned encampment that we had under the freeway on the Caltrans property that was opened in 2020 as a response to the pandemic and the sort of spike in homelessness that we were seeing, we also got sued several times. We got sued when we opened the sanctioned encampment there under the freeway, and we got sued again when we closed it. And we also had a couple of other lawsuits relating to different things that occurred along the way. And we've been very successful in ultimately achieving a favorable result for the city in these cases, with the exception being the one against the ordinance that we had to, do some work to get on the right side of Judge Chen and go back and look at the ordinance again, as I said. But I'm just wishing to relate to all of you that there has been a substantial amount of litigation activity, not just in San Rafael, but throughout California, but here in San Rafael, we've had our share. And if we were to amend our ordinance when these ideas that John was describing and any other ideas that may come from the community are presented to the city council, I think right now we're lined up for April 7th to have a conversation about all that and for the city council to discuss. We should expect that if we do anything, like John said, one option is the do nothing option. If we do something to the ordinance, like, do something with the fire zones or otherwise, like he was describing, don't be surprised if the city gets sued again by, advocates who are representing the unhoused community and, looking to challenge these laws. By way of example, the city of Fremont rather notably, because there's been a lot of publicity around this, in response to the Grants Pass decision and in response to its community that was asking for it, enacted an outright, total camping ban. They said you can't camp in Fremont, and there has been a lawsuit filed against Fremont, and I believe the story I read today said that an injunction's been entered and the city cannot enforce that ordinance. And the attorney who filed the action is one of the attorneys who filed against our ordinance, and so we're familiar with him. He files a lot of cases. So that's kind of the litigation backdrop of what happens when we make laws regulating the unhoused in our community. The legality of our laws is going to typically get challenged, and we're prepared and we'll defend again. But that's why we try to be as thoughtful as we can about it and think about what are the claims that might be made and how can we best insulate ourselves against attack and come up with a local ordinance that's going to survive, some judicial scrutiny. There's one other thing I wanted to say about the litigation before I went on to the next point. It'll come back to me. Well, what I really want to focus on tonight is enforcement and what that looks like, because I know, having read the newspaper, having heard about prior meetings, and having attended hundreds and hundreds of city meetings myself over the years, that there's a lot of interest in bans, enforcement, and doing something about the unhoused folks in our community. And I want to describe what the something would look like in the event that enforcement takes place, and what the challenges are with that. So the code that's under discussion is our municipal code. And we have a camping ordinance that currently allows camping in certain areas of San Rafael and prohibits camping in other areas of San Rafael. And again, that could be expanded like they did in Fremont, but that doesn't mean we won't get sued. And by the way, we know already, this is the other thing I wanted to tell you, that the cruel and unusual Eighth Amendment argument, the cruel and unusual punishment argument that was advanced in the Grants Pass case, is not the only legal theory available to plaintiffs who are challenging these ordinances. There are other theories that they have advanced and will advance. And so some people believe you can waive the Grants Pass case at them, and then that's the end of the next federal district court case that gets filed against us. And I can guarantee it won't be that easy. So in order to describe what enforcement looks like, if we're talking about actually enforcing our law, our camping ordinance against a person who's violating it, I kind of need to walk you through our local law enforcement and judicial system. We have representatives here, like my friend Rob Cleland back there, who has certainly in his course of his duties as a police officer engaged many, many times with our unhoused community. So I think using him as an example for a second, let's think about somebody who is violating the current ordinance, okay, which and you can ask these questions of these folks later. I don't think that's happening much, if at all, now. We used to have a lot of people camping up on Santa Fe Hill, up by where Joanne and I live, and we don't really have that issue now. What we're seeing, and which so many people are upset about, of course, because of the appearance of it, the impacts of it, are people that are out, on the streets, on the sidewalks, and then, of course, in our current sanctioned encampment down at Mahone Creek. So, but let's assume, for my hypothetical case here, that somebody is camping where they're not supposed to right now. They're up on Santa Fe Hill, and somebody calls PD, and there's a response. Okay, so the person is, technically in violation of our ordinance because they are camping, and there's a whole definition of what that looks like, in a place that they're not supposed to be. Okay. Right now, if someone were to make that mistake, if you will, the likely first outcome, I can almost guarantee this, is that our officer will interact with the person and let them know that they're violating the law and request that they move because they're in the wrong spot. And I think typically, and again, I'm looking at Lynn and Rob back there, but we'll gain compliance from the individual when they're educated about the problem in the moment, unless they're like completely out of their gourd and unwilling to, comply, which is really unusual. They'll, pack up their kit bag and stuff and move, right? And that's why right now, mostly what we have are people who are complying by camping in areas where it's allowed in San Rafael. But you can add to my hypothetical, if the city were to adopt an overall camping ban, which I understand, some people may advocate. It's not something I've advocated. It's not something I would recommend. It's something that I think would be inconsistent with San Rafael in so many ways in terms of what we're trying to do for this population of people, that having a full-on outright camping ban, I think would be surprising to me, but it's something that, the council may certainly deliberate and talk about it at the April meeting. But let's assume we had that, and now anywhere the person is, they're in violation because they're camping outside, and Rob or Lynn, whoever responds, has to tell them, hey, we have an outright camping ban here, and you can't be in San Rafael at all. Well, like I alluded to earlier, people have been living outside in San Rafael for many, many years, and our enactment of a law doesn't make them magically disappear. They're still going to be here. And then the question is, if we have a law enforcement response and they are unwilling to comply with a directive to move, what's going to happen to them? What's the sanction going to be that's going to discourage the conduct from continuing, right? So it's a municipal code citation, right? It's not like an officer having probable cause to arrest somebody for a violation of the penal code, like a misdemeanor or a felony, or like a crime's committed in an officer's presence, or they get information sufficient to arrest. This is a violation of the municipal code, which is committed in the officer's presence, and the officer, delivers a citation, not unlike the form that you might get a parking ticket if you were to fail to pay your parking meter on 4th Street. So but the code contemplates that this municipal offense may be prosecuted as a misdemeanor. And so then the question becomes, does that ever happen? And how would that play out? And what benefit, if any, would accrue to the community for that kind of enforcement, and whether it would discourage the conduct from occurring in the future. So the information I'm going to give you now is born of spending more than 30 years working at what we call Blue Roof Inn over there on Civic Center Drive, and spending a lot of time in our local courthouse. And courtroom M being the one where the misdemeanors come in and have their initial arraignments. I don't practice criminal law. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I've talked about these subjects a lot with our local district attorney representatives, public defender representatives, and our local bench. Um, the thing I think to consider at the outset is if someone's to go into this system, they're going to get appointed counsel, right? The public defender's office. And the public defender, if the case can't get resolved via some sort of a settlement, a resolution between the district attorney and the public defender is going to demand a jury trial on behalf of the individual. And like I said, I've been practicing law in this county for a long time. I've never heard of one of these cases getting tried. And if you think about it, imagine getting called for that jury. It's not a case that the community is going to be really receptive to. It's distinct and different from, for example, being called to serve in a DUI case, or God forbid, a felony case with a violent crime. This would be coming and assembling to consider the evidence from Rob or Lynn or whoever it is. I'm going to conclude my remarks and then I'll take questions. That would then be, the jury would be asked, was there a violation of the municipal code that prohibited camping? And, if there were a guilty verdict, then the judge would have to decide how to punish, right? So what I'm suggesting to all of you, and what I really want to try to help the entire community appreciate, is that enforcement in the sense that I just described, with like a prosecution and a case against somebody that goes all the way through the system and through trial with a verdict and a judgment and jail time for the individual, it's so unlikely. It's like a meteor. And in Fremont, for example, I can't imagine that it's any different in the county of Alameda or any other county, frankly. So then the question becomes, what's the benefit of the law? What's the benefit of announcing the ban if you were to do an overall ban? If the population of people aren't really likely to all, get in a bus and leave town, if they're likely to stay and kind of wait and see what happens, then we're going to have to, perhaps go through that process if we're to have such a law and see, what the outcome is. But in our experience, I think the most likely outcomes would look something like this. If we had a citation and, these things get transmitted up to the district attorney's office on some periodic basis, they have crimes that they're dealing with. They never complain of being overstaffed up there. So they're trying to focus their attention on, protecting the safety of the community against violent crime, and priorities that they have, like, domestic abuse, and drugs, and other stuff. So this isn't like a priority area for them. But let's say they had one guy that just reoffended, if you will, over and over and over again, and got 10 tickets in a 2-week period of time. He just wouldn't listen to Rob, and he kept going back to the same spot and camping in a spot where he wasn't allowed. So now we've got 10 citations sitting on the desk of the charging deputy at the district attorney's office. Well, he can certainly file a complaint, a criminal complaint against the individual. And eventually, if they appear for their court appearance, if they're able to be found and served with the criminal complaint, and then they appear as required, the strong likelihood, like 99.9%, is that the judge ultimately is going to impose what they call diversion as the resolution of the case. In other words, it won't go down the road toward a trial. It'll kind of get killed as a criminal lawsuit at the first stage or an early stage, and the case will be disposed of with a diversion order. There's state law, Penal Code Section 1001.95, for those who like to do extra reading after the meeting, that actually, and this law wasn't always this way, but now, even if the district attorney for some reason got really ginned up to pursue the thing and was opposing the idea of a diversion, the judge can still impose it over the district attorney's objection. And then there's another Penal Code Section 1001.36 that allows the court to make a diversion for mental health services. So what is diversion as a resolution of a criminal case? It's not probation, right? Because probation has the threat of criminal sanction. If somebody agrees to conditions of probation in exchange for the dismissal of the criminal case against them, then if they violate probation, you've all heard that term, then they can be arrested for the probation violation, and actually the original charge on which they got probation can be resurrected and they can be pursued on that. Diversion doesn't work that way. Diversion's simply an agreement that the person makes that they're going to fulfill, the diversion conditions. And with folks like this, the conditions are likely to be things like the things that people like Lynn and Mel and Daniel have already been trying to do with the population from the outset, which is go to your mental health appointment that Health and Human Services is working to schedule for you, or go to your drug and alcohol treatment that you need to get. And those are the kind of things that would likely be the diversion conditions. Okay. So again, I'm making the point here that at the end of this criminal law process that I just described, the likely punishment, if you will, that would be imposed on the individual would be looking pretty similar to the kind of things that our city staff and county staff that's working with this population have been trying on a one-by-one iterative basis to get the folks to do in the first instance. But let's assume we got to the stage, the person got the diversion order, and then they were to fail to comply with it. They didn't go to the mental health services appointment. They didn't go to the drug and alcohol rehab meeting. It's possible to petition to revoke the diversion order and they put them back in front of the court. But again, extremely unlikely in a case like this that would ever happen. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately because of the interest in the community in trying to find a legal means to address our homeless issue, our unhoused population. And a belief and a wish, because there's so much news we're reading about it, from Grants Pass to Fremont to the rest of it, that there is some way that lawyers and police officers can somehow apply legal means to abate the problem. And what I'm here to tell you is I don't find that realistic. Sadly, it to me is not the answer. And I'm glad to take more questions on this, kind of judicial law enforcement path that I just described, because I kind of sped through it. But what I'm trying to have you folks appreciate are the challenges that are presented by any enforcement of any camping ban, big or small. Okay. So I see your hand and I'll be coming back to you in just a moment. I'm almost done. To me, because the conclusion of the process kind of takes us all the way back to the beginning of the case-by-case work that needs to be done with folks in the community to help them get out of the situation they're in on a one-by-one, case-by-case basis. And sometimes we succeed and sometimes we fail. But I think that continues to be the best answer that we have. We have amazing staff that are working on it. And I'll also comment, again, having worked with our staff in this field for many years, every time that we go examine the population, I hear the same thing. Most of the people, they didn't just come to town. Most of them have been living here for more than 10 years. A lot of them grew up here, like Roger and Mike and Joanne and me. They just didn't have their lives turn out the way that ours have. And it's sad, but I hope that our community focus continues to be looking at how we can help these people move to a better place in their lives, rather than figuring out a way to make any possible camping, at least in this moment in Santa Fe, illegal and then try to enforce laws against it, which to me is a little fool's errand. So Mel advertised that I was going to be speaking at the meeting tonight, and for people that are familiar with me, like Joanne, I thought it might discourage attendance because I can go on and on and on. I'll stop now. I already have one question. I'm glad to take more, but please know that my comments come from someone who has a deep love for this community. As I said, we moved here from Corte Madera in 1964 when I was the ripe age of 2. And I went to all Sanderfeld schools. All 3 of my kids did. I see the same things that everybody else sees every day in our community. I live a couple of blocks from here. And so I don't take any of this lightly. I have very deep feelings about all of it, like all of you do. But I also bring my attorney's experience and background to it. So I'd like to take the question from the person who's raised her hand several times. Thanks for your patience.
I'm Katie Fleet, and
nice to meet you, Katie.
Hi, I'm a Bristol Park resident and a parent of a child who goes to Sun Valley Elementary School.
As mine did.
I'm on the board of my neighborhood association as well, and it's got a lot of feedback and information from the community where people really are concerned for safety of ourselves and of our children, especially, and of the proximity of the current sanctioned campground to both Parkside Children's Center and Davidson Elementary School. And obviously addressing the location of the sanctioned campground is something really important to a lot of us who live nearby, because we don't think that the status quo is good for the community and for people who aren't living there. But I think I support banning camping in all the city parks personally, and Bristol Park especially. I think the fire danger is one reason. The importance of parks to children and to children's mental health in this time is extremely important. And these are really sacred parts of our community that deserve protection. I would encourage limiting camping further in parks and also in proximity to childcare and to schools. And there are lots of other places in the Ninth Circuit where that's happened. And it hasn't been the subject of contentious litigation or, has been upheld. I think we've lived a lot in San Rafael the last few years hostage to this litigation. And I know the city has experienced a lot of, economic and frankly personal challenges because of this litigation. It was extremely, complicated, and a lot of the, issues in the litigation didn't make sense to those of us who were lawyers and who read the cases and who kept up on the decisions. And, it was complicated, but I don't think we can live in fear of lawsuits by illogical litigants and have that compromise the safety and well-being of everyone in the city. And I just think that we need to take that into account and provide further limitations that protect the safety and health of everyone, and that have, a moderate litigation risk. And I think the litigation risk of further limitations in parks and schools and childcare are very reasonable. The Fremont case has some aspects to it that are very different from what we're doing too. They wholesale limited camping, and they also created penalties for people who aid and abet homeless people getting services, which, I don't think anyone here would ever do. I mean, most people in this room have said, we want to help people get services. We want to get, people toward help. I hear what you're saying about the court situation. I was a legal aid lawyer. I worked in courts for a long time. I know some of this stuff is complicated, but you can't tell me that there's no enforcement for a person camping in front of Parkside Children's Center, or a person who's camping in Albert Park in violation of the ordinance. Like, we have to be able to do something about that.
I think maybe we're talking past each other, Katie, and I am going to just interject for a moment because I also want to make clear the okay, I appreciate it. I support much of what Katie's saying too. I think I don't want to be talking past each other though. We do have our ordinance that's already in place. It has restrictions, and as I was trying to describe at the outset, we do enforce. And if somebody is in a spot where they're not supposed to be, that's where he's getting at. Typically, the person will move to a place where they're not prohibited. Okay, and so if the city were to expand to parks, as you've been suggesting. My expectation would be that we would continue to gain compliance with the folks who might be unaware of the new law and mistakenly camp there, because I think, again, Rob's been nodding his head. We don't get a lot of people that say, no way, Officer Cleveland, like I ain't moving. Like people don't do that. Like they will, comply. But can I say this? I believe that the esteemed Lorenzo's plan for our evening at some point is to give everybody a chance to express their thoughts that the staff is then going to be assigned to transmit to City Council for those of you unable to make it to the April 7 meeting. And so the kind of things that you're expressing, Katie, are terrific. And I would hope that you use my time here. If you got questions about the enforcement stuff or stuff that I said, your thoughts, hang on one sec, your thoughts and opinions on what the city ought to do with the ordinance, I would suggest that you express in the groups that Lorenzo's going to set up with our different staff members present to hear everybody in the room who wants to speak, offer their thoughts. Katie had something else though.
I'll defer to Bob, who I don't want to ask the question.
Yeah, I'll be very brief.
Sure, take all comers.
Here's what I think you're missing. You're missing the map behind yourself. And you're missing when the officer goes out to Gerstle Park open space.
Mhm.
The reason he can gain compliance is there's a law against camping.
I agree.
Okay.
We're in
There's a law
agreement.
against camping because of the fire danger.
Right.
Gerstle Park itself allows camping, and you would have it continue to allow that.
I did not say that.
Well,
But that's the law.
No,
That's the current law.
when you say, wait, hang on a second, I got to respond to that. When you say you would have it continue, no. I mean, John just told you the city is going to be looking at whether to do a larger areas of prohibitions at the April 7th meeting. I'm not advocating anything other than logic as it relates to enforcement,
well,
because
Rob,
that's what I'm trying to
but-
explain.
But let's put the cards on the table. Even though you're the lawyer for the city, you have just told us that you don't recommend a complete ban everywhere, because that's not what San Rafael is. That's not a legal judgment.
That's my opinion. You're correct.
Okay, and so you're going beyond strict law. What I'm saying is, we do not want camping in Gerstle Park because we do not want our community to look like Palisades or Lahaina. Or
Understood.
all the other places.
We're on the same page.
Okay. If people are camping there in Gerstle Park with a fire, under your thinking, what's going to be done about it? When Officer Cleveland goes down there, he doesn't have any ordinance right now.
Correct.
Okay, and so what we want is an ordinance, so when he goes down there, he has something behind him to tell people to move on.
That's super helpful for you to offer. And similar to the comments that Katie was making, I think that any others in the room who feel that way should please express themselves. I don't really think now's the moment for the free for all. Again, the design of hang on a second. The design of the meeting is for people that have thoughts like Bob's and Katie's, which are very welcome. And I haven't heard any disagreement between you and me yet, Bob. You may be feeling it, but I'm not. But I'd like, when we're ready, when the questions to me are done, to have the groups that John and Lorenzo designed for our meeting, so everybody can say what they think. And if everyone thinks similarly to Bob, great. That'll be a really effective message to bring back to the city council on April 7th, when they consider whether to adopt a increase to the current ban of the nature that Bob just described.
All I'm saying is, those of us sitting here, it sounds like of the three camps, do nothing, ban park by park, or ban everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The tenor of your remarks are to do nothing other than what we're doing.
Well,
now.
I will resist that, Bob. The tenor of my remarks is nothing. I'm not advocate. Other than I will stand by what I said. I think a complete ban is really, like I said, inconsistent with San Rafael, but also kind of silly, because it's not going to be able to be enforced in any effective way. That's the point I was trying to make. Mr. Cleveland has the floor, and I have the gavel and have the ability to call on whom I choose at this moment. So I'm going to call on the uniformed officer.
You guys are seeing between Rob and what you guys are thinking is, so my unit does a ton of, you see me on the first part a lot. So our ordinance right now just is to tease in the prohibited spots to enforce it. It doesn't mean giving a citation up to the district attorney, but it gives us, in our ordinance says we have to give them a 48-hour notice, or if it's in the administrative order places, you have to give them 24 hours, right? We give them a post, hey, you need to get out of here for this reason, and they usually comply. If not, our enforcement is, we now take your camp, we store anything of value, and we take it for 90 days, you can come pick it up, but they're no longer in that section. So it's enforcement, which is not going to DA, because we know the ticket's probably didn't go nowhere. So that's what, I think Rob's talking about enforcement. The DA, district attorney doesn't have the time. It's a very busy city, probably busier than you guys think. But so we are doing a ton of enforcement, and it's basically something pops up, our ordinance is allowing us to manage it and then respond within 2 days. Except for, the places in the parks you're talking about, if they expand it, then we'll have the team to get it out of that one. Right, so a total ban, it would just be, you can't be here, and then they put it on the street. You can't be here, and you put it on the street. The district attorney doesn't have time to prosecute it.
See, Rob just gave you in a minute what I was trying to do and took me 20 minutes. So that's the point, really, what he just said. Yes, sir.
You've mentioned that essentially enforcing the law is not possible, all right? And
Well, other than in the way that
Yeah,
Rob's
and then-
describing when you gain
understand.
compliance with an individual
I
voluntarily.
understand. Okay, so there is trying to get compliance, but there's no teeth as such behind it. Quite simply because what was added to the ordinance is a thing called mens rea, and that means that they have to understand it and have to willfully disobey a thing.
Disagree.
Okay, okay.
I don't believe the mens rea requirement is the issue around judicial enforcement in the way I just described. It's
Okay,
a
all right.
resources at the courthouse issue. not an
May I
ordinance
then point
issue.
out one thing one aspect of that. Personally, I think that the city is being derelict in its duty, not only to the residents, but to the homeless people themselves. All right. You talk about not enforcing things and being concerned about violence in the community. There is 19 times more murder in the actual camps themselves, and this is San Diego's district attorney that came up with these figures. 19 times more murders that happen inside the camps. All right. So having enforcement that doesn't allow you to actually address those kind of issues is a major problem. So that's a dereliction of duty as far as the homeless are concerned.
Is this a question coming at me, sir?
Yes.
Okay, I'm waiting for it.
I'm getting there. Okay,
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So that's the one thing. The second that's actually happening is these camps are being allowed to spread throughout the city of San Rafael. As far as the residents are concerned, the dereliction of duty there is there are communicable diseases, and it's well documented. CDC has documented this. Communicable diseases in these camps. They're being spread around 25 parks in San Rafael. That's a dereliction of duty from the city itself to actually look after the residents of the city. So how do you, as a city attorney, how do you address that from a legal point of view? Are you saying it's just not impossible? It's impossible to do.
I'm going to do a couple of things. I'll respond to your question. I see Daniel back there who also wants to speak. But again, I think we're kind of shifting here to part 3 of the meeting, which is people expressing their opinions, which we want to hear. It's not really a question to me. I've given you, I don't agree with your statement that the city's derelict in its duty. Okay, so we disagree
Okay,
about
so you
that.
agree to disagree with it. Yes.
I disagree with
Right.
that.
The problem
And
lies from- Yeah.
is it my turn now?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so what I do believe is that using the tools that are reasonably and logically at our disposal, well-drafted ordinances, well-trained law enforcement, compassionate people that work in our community, we are enforcing on a case-by-case, individual by individual basis to get people in compliance with the rules as they exist today. I said that a couple of times, that we're really not seeing a lot of violations of our current ordinance by way of people camping where they're not supposed to. Your point suggests, sir, that we would be derelict in our duty, if
Yes.
I'm following your logic,
Yes.
to not adopt an overall camping ban. And I would expect that you'll be advocating that position both tonight and at the city council meeting, if we're lucky enough to have you come. Again, one of us can talk at a time, otherwise we can't really express our ideas. So that's not going to work for me. But that's where I was trying to describe earlier, if we were to adopt that position, if I were to agree with you that unless the city were to adopt an overall camping ban and to enforce, well, it's the natural corollary of what you're saying. You know, I can't interpret it any differently.
How do you address the problems that I've just described? Okay, that
An overall camping ban.
and so you have no legal solution to this problem. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. And we're talking past each other again.
Okay.
Our legal solutions we've been working on for years, including the ordinance that we enacted, that we got sued over, that we then revised after Judge Chen's order, and which we're now enforcing in the community. Those are the solutions. I understand that for folks, they feel like it's not enough now. For Katie, she doesn't feel like it's sufficient in her neighborhood. There's been a suggestion that we need more, that we need to ban in parks altogether. And that's on the agenda, as John already described. But I see Molly. I'm glad to take questions, but I feel like I'm taking time away from those of you who are going to want to discuss your
I have a
ideas.
question that I think relates more to having productive discussions. Can you clarify really quickly, where is camping currently allowed today? Where is it currently?
I'll
not
let
allowed?
staff take
Because
that
I'm
one.
not-
Yeah, I'll let staff take that one. But before I do, I want to conclude my time at the podium. So if there are questions about the sort of track of law enforcement that I described, I'm here to take them. So, ma'am, I didn't hear from you yet.
Yeah, so you spoke a lot about like the legal process and why it might not be an outcome that you are assuming everybody wants, but I just want to clarify that there might be other ways of enforcement that Officer Cleveland mentioned that are part of the ordinance that might be maybe not a legal thing, but a deterrent. So if there was camping, if the ordinance changed to say that you cannot camp in our city parks, there are other ways besides a criminal pursuit, such as confiscation of items that the city could use to try and enforce voluntarily the no camping bans in the parks. That's correct?
We're currently doing that. That's what
Yeah.
we already do that.
Well,
Right.
that's what I'm saying. If you expand it, it could be done. It just sounds
Okay,
like
we're in agreement.
I just wanted to clarify because
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you were speaking, to me, it sounded like you were saying there's no point in doing anything.
I did not express myself well, if that's the way you took from my remarks. What I was trying to do, and I want to make sure it's clear, is that I feel like a lot of times when I hear about the idea of enforcement other than what Rob's describing, that is, prosecution type of enforcement with a judge and district attorney and all of that. That's what I'm trying to describe as not an avenue that I think is worthwhile for anyone involved to pursue. That's really all I was trying to say. And Katie, I want to hear from you, but Molly hasn't had a chance to speak yet. And then Joanne.
Wondering if there's going to be time to take one step. This may not be exactly a question. Sorry, one step back, and the real issue is there's not enough housing. We don't have enough places for these people. And as someone who lives in Bret Hart neighborhood, some of us, and who walks by the encampments regularly, not always feeling comfortable, drives by them regularly, not feeling safe. Definitely don't fight down Anderson. There was an illegal encampment that was just taken out from up in the hills in our neighborhood. And that's just going to be a byproduct of the fact we don't have enough spaces legally for the people. I mean, I'm just wondering how the numbers game is being sorted out.
I'll turn that back to staff too, and you'll be hearing more about that on April 7th. But I'm in radical agreement with you, Molly. Joanne, you had something.
I'll make mine really quick.
Yeah.
I took the liberty of getting a map of Santa Fe, outlined city Santa Fe, marked in the 19 of the 21 parks we're talking about with dots. And then I figured out from the legend a mile radius around each park. I only have 9 circles here before I build the entire city of Santa Fe. I know from my daily walks through Peacock Gap Park, 13,000 steps today included, that I can walk okay, I can walk 1 mile in 15 minutes, and I'm a 70-year-old lady. So I'm an old
Your point
person.
is, Joanne.
My point is, every single resident of Santa Fe, every resident in Santa Fe is within a mile of one of the parks that they want to allow homeless people to be. Now, the homeless people aren't in the parks. Oh, well, thank you, Paul. You're such a help. But you know what? Here's the deal. The point is, I brought with me a friend of mine from Fairfax, who is a very talented man that managed to be on the major team of people that were able to solve the problem for Fairfax. I'm going to introduce him. His name's Charlie.
So for this, okay,
I,
hold on.
I'm going to turn it over to John because I think we're moving on to the next stage of our meeting. Thank you all for your attention
Let's give,
and patience with me. I
Rob-
appreciate it.
He'll be here all night if you have any
Yeah,
other
yeah.
questions.
Right, and another show at 11.
So, okay, so look, this is a very contentious issue. I think people have very strong feelings one way or another about how the city responds to this humanitarian crisis that is facing all of us daily. And I implore everyone in this room to exercise some restraint around the way that we are talking to one another and the way that we are either giving space or taking space in the way that we are talking. Because if this devolves into what it was in the last meeting, it will be shut down. And I'm serious about that. We are all adults. We can have discourse and we can have disagreements, but we will not have people talking over one another in a way that is completely disrespectful to your fellow residents. It's unacceptable. Having said all of that, we did a housing and homelessness subcommittee meeting with the city council. It was Mayor Kate and Rachel. You met them when they came to the first meeting and they spoke, and they discussed the camping ordinance. And that video is on our YouTube page, and I encourage you all to watch it. Joanne was there sitting at the table with us in a rather small conference room. And I encourage you guys to watch it because there's considerable discourse there between the mayor and the council member, and they are not in agreement with what the city should do with regards to making changes to the camping ordinance. We had planned to show that video, but I think given just where we are in space and time, I think you all know how to work YouTube, and you can go look at the city of San Rafael's website and
It'd be helpful if we
pull
could
it
send the
there.
link, though.
And we can send the link
That'd be
out as
helpful.
well.
Thank you.
But with that in mind, what we are looking for from this group this evening, and the big ask is, that we're going to break out into at least 2 groups for you all to discuss what is it that the city should consider as it relates to changes or amendments to the camping ordinance. Daniel and the team are working on a pretty sizable update to the city council that will be going on April 7th. And given the conversations that we have had, I am fully expecting a good number, if not all of you, to show up to that meeting to express how you feel about what the city should be doing as it relates to the camping ordinance. 6 o'clock, city council chambers. Parking is free.
Cocktails?
I wish. No cocktails.
You know that's spring break for the city schools, right? The 6th through the 12th.
We do council
Yeah.
meetings on the 1st and 3rd Monday, and you
I
know,
know.
for me, I plan my wedding around council meeting dates, so it's just a fact of life. But we're going to break out into 2 small groups. We have, let's say, 15-ish minutes for you all to discuss. I want to make sure that everybody in this room has an opportunity to express how they feel and make sure that their opinions are heard. After that, we are going to have the groups report out and just give a general thematic overview of the conversations that you have had. And then after that, because this is something that will be reported onto the city council, is we have a QR code that will pull up on the screen. We want everybody to fill out a survey that in a sense votes what you think the city should do as it relates to either doing nothing, banning in parks with high fire severity zones, or other, which is fill in the blank.
And it is anonymous.
And it is anonymous. So, any questions? Mimi?
So I have a question on when the police come and they tell them to leave and they're compliant, where do they go?
That's that right there is the question. And getting to Rob's earlier point about having a complete wholesale ban in the city, when other cities and towns in the county have done just that, where do they go? Because to Molly's point, there isn't enough shelter space or affordable housing to house the over 1,000 people in this county who do not currently have a home. And
Like what happens when you just go and you ask, where are they going?
We don't tell them where they can go, we tell them where they can't go, basically.
So you watch them and see where they go?
No,
No, so you don't know.
it's America, you can go wherever you want, so we plan to do.
Well, but you kind of know where people are camping.
No, we do,
So
but
where
she
are
said
those
it's
places?
checking all the time.
So-
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable question.
so everyone, we're not going to devolve into one big, large conversation, but the point that I was going to make, excuse me, I'm talking.
Okay, folks, John, can we just give John?
I want to
the
make
mic?
one final point on this before we break out into groups to talk about the three options that are on the screen. As it relates to identifying additional shelter space and affordable housing in this county, when we look around to the other cities and towns who are trying to do anything in this space, I can tell you that it's the city of San Rafael and the county of Marin. And Daniel and the team, myself, have been working with the county executive's office since last August, trying to identify places for people to go. Long-term solutions. And that is unfortunately where we find ourselves at. Having said that, we're going to have everybody count off, or do we just want to like split up the room in half? Split the room in half, and you can discuss these three options or other.
Please, pardon me, that was a really good question someone had. Just repeat if briefly. I probably knew exactly what I'm wondering, what our current ordinance is. You could be in the home park way, you could be along Houston Drive.
So this is something that we covered at the very first meeting, and I can do my best to regurgitate it from memory. Camping is permitted on certain public properties so long as people abide by setback requirements and camp size site maximums.